On the grounds of the Israel Museum, this limestone model of 1st century Jerusalem enables visitors to retrace events that changed the world. By merging this impressive model, built on a scale of 1 to 50, with the streets of modern Jerusalem, Mart De Haan and Jimmy DeYoung will follow Jesus, event by event, place to place, to Easter Sunday and beyond. Behind the Easter story, retracing the footsteps of Jesus from his betrayal to his resurrection and disappearance in the sky on this day of discovery. This is the land of the Bible, the modern city of Jerusalem. Using miniature limestone blocks, archaeologists, historians, and designers have built a scale model of 1st century Jerusalem to help us picture how it might have looked when Rome ruled the world. But more importantly, this model takes us behind the Easter story. It helps us to trace the flow of events of Jesus' last days in Jerusalem, events that changed our sense of time and history. Events that became the dividing line of BC and AD on our calendars.
It was 1 week. It fell at the very center of human history. And today, Jimmy and I want to walk with you through the events as they unfolded. To provide some perspective, Jimmy's at the Israel Museum. I'm going to be on the street. And together we're going to trace those events as they unfolded. Events that ended up changing the very course of human history.
We're at the Ezra Museum here in Jerusalem. It's a model of the city of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, during the time of the Roman Empire, during the days of Jesus Christ. I'm technically on the top of the Mount of Olives from the position where I'm standing, overlooking the city, overlooking the temple complex itself there on the Temple Mount. Down below me in the slopes of the Mount of Olives would be the Garden of Gethsemane, where the soldiers would come as Jesus has been betrayed to take him to the mock trials.
Here in the shadows of these olive trees, we can only imagine the darkness that surrounded Jesus as he thought and prayed about what those final hours would bring.
Speaking to his disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Matthew chapter 26.
After the arrest of Jesus there in the Garden of Gethsemane, the soldiers would take him back across the Kidron Valley by the southern steps leading up into the temple, up to the upper city where those red-roofed homes are. He would take him to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest. Mart is in one of those locations that traditionally would be the home of Caiaphas to help us remember what happened that night.
This gives us a good perspective on the area where Jesus was arrested in Gethsemane. Across the valley, just beyond the southeast corner of the old wall of Jerusalem, the green area is Gethsemane and the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. Here Jesus was arrested by the mob, by the guard attached to Caiaphas, the high priest. And together they led him back across the valley to some place in the upper part of the city here. And here, a series of illegal trials and denials began.
And they led Jesus away to the high priest, and with him were assembled all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. But Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he sat with the servants and warmed himself at the fire. Mark chapter 14.
These bronze statues represent an event that Jesus had predicted before his arrest. He had told his disciples that he would be taken and that all men would abandon him. Peter objected. He said, "Not me, Lord, I'll never leave you." And Jesus looked at him and said, "Peter, before the cock crows, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. Well, Jesus was brought here to this part of the city. He was brought in before Caiaphas, the high priest. Peter was left outside. It was cold. He was warming himself by a fire, and a young servant girl thought that she recognized him and said, "Aren't you a friend of Jesus of Nazareth?" Peter found himself denying it. In fact, he vigorously denied it. And then Peter heard the cock crow.
Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him, saying, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you are saying." And when he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him, and said to those who were there, "This fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth." But again he denied with an oath, "I do not know the man." And a little later those who stood by came up and said to Peter, "Surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you." Then he began to curse and swear, saying, "I do not know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." So he went out and wept bitterly. Matthew chapter 26.
That night and the following day, there were actually 6 mock trials of Jesus that took place.
Now the chief priests and all the council sought testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witness against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands.' But not even then did their testimony agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, 'Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?' But he kept silent and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him, saying to him, 'Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?' Jesus said, 'I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power, and coming with the clouds of heaven.' Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, 'What further need do we have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?' And they all condemned him to be deserving of death." Mark chapter 14.